Okay, we can start. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me thank my colleagues Manuela Ripa and Michael Biesic, for their excellent cooperation in the preparation of this event. I also thank EBCD for organizing it and all the speakers and experts for joining us. Thank you, thank you. We are lucky to have exceptional panelists today. I also want to thank all participants who are here in the Parliament, in Brussels, and also those connected online. We meet today because the fight against wildlife trafficking cannot wait. When wildlife trade is illegal or unsustainable, it is not only about biodiversity loss, it becomes organized crime, fierce corruption, and money laundering, and threatens public health, especially. It harms ecosystems, security, and also development. Let me give some examples. In Europe, glass eel smuggling is still one of the most profitable wildlife crimes. In Mexico, the illegal trade of totoaba is driving the vaquita proposed to extinction. And even in the EU, ivory trafficking continues, with loopholes that threaten elephants, critical endangered species. These examples show how global and serious the problem is, and why CITES is so important to protect species and to stop illegal trade. Yes, this Tuesday in the ENVI committee, we discussed with the European Commission the new study criminalization of illegally sourced wildlife trade with Cristina de Ávila. The study is very clear. The illegal trade in wild animals and plants must be criminalized across the EU. We need harmonized rules, very strong penalties for traffickers, and better cooperation between authorities. This is the only way to stop organized crime and protect biodiversity. I am proud to say that on Monday we reached agreement on the compromise amendments for the Parliament resolution on CITES CoP20. This resolution will now express a strong, united position of the European Parliament. It gives us clear priorities for Uzbekistan, for Samarkand. Let me highlight some of them. We call for a stronger enforcement and traceability of trade, especially for species such as sharks, rays, eels, corals, elephants, captive bred tigers, and also vaquita and totoaba. We insist on science-based decisions in CITES, always with the science, applying the precautionary principle. We support the One Health approach to prevent zoonotic risks from wildlife trade. Don't forget, please, COVID-19. Don't forget. We underline the importance of creating a positive list of pets in the EU to stop the trade in exotic animals that are not suitable as pets. And we stress that the EU rules to ban the ivory market must become binding legislation, not only guidelines, binding legislation. Of course, challenges remain. We need more resources for CITES implementation, more transparency in its processes, and a stronger cooperation against new threats such as cybercrime. This will be important discussions in Uzbekistan, in Samarkand. But overall, I am satisfied with the strong and balanced position that the European Parliament will bring to COP20. With this position, the EU shows leadership and commitment to defend biodiversity and to fight wildlife trafficking worldwide. I look forward to working with all of you in the coming weeks and months to prepare for a successful COP20. Let us use today's discussion to exchange views, build alliance, and strengthen our common message. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Manuela Ripa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cesare, dear colleagues, dear panelists, dear participants here in the room and online. A warm welcome also from my side to this event today, this important event. And I can underline everything that Cesar said. So now I will try to add some points. The International CITES Treaty on Wildlife Protection has recently celebrated its 50th anniversary, and its significance cannot be overstated today. Wild animals, and these often people don't realize, wild animals nowadays make up only 4% of all mammals by biomass. There are 15 times more livestock animals than wild animals, and we must consistently enforce CITES and adapt it to current challenges because the clock is ticking loudly for wildlife and biodiversity. Let me just give you a concrete example that I mentioned the other day in the ENVI committee while we were discussing the study on criminalization of illegally sourced wildlife trade. A few days ago, I'm sure all of you know, in Brazil, the authorities carried out a major raid against wildlife traffickers. They have seized more than 700 exotic animals and rescued them from smugglers. And the shocking thing, according to estimates, around 90% of the animals captured in this trade die before they ever reach the market. Only 10% survive. All this is not only a tragedy for biodiversity, Cesar mentioned it, it's also a brutal reminder that wildlife crime is one of the cruelest and fastest growing forms of organized crime worldwide. It drives species towards extinction, degrades ecosystems, fuels biodiversity loss and criminal networks, and poses real risk to public health through zoonotic diseases and other risks. Often people don't know that, but in my constituency, there was a case that they had to evacuate a whole building, a whole apartment building, because somebody held illegally a poisonous snake that escaped. So they had to evacuate because they didn't know where the snake was. Indeed, in the European Parliament, we are formulating our strategies, demands for CITES conference CoP20 late November in Uzbekistan, where Cesar and I have the honor to chair the delegation of the European Parliament. Illegal wildlife trade, Cesar mentioned it already, is a billion-dollar business. According to Interpol, the black market for illegal wildlife products is worth up to $20 billion per year. What can be done? Firstly, I firmly believe that we need a Lacey Act modeled after the US in the EU and worldwide. This would make it illegal to import, export, transport, or sell species or their products if they have obtained in violation of laws. At present, traffickers can bring, for example, a pregnant animal illegally into the EU and sell their offspring as legal, and this definitely must end. Secondly, an important step for the EU would be, for example, introduction of a positive list of animals allowed to be kept or traded as pets. Nearly 90% of EU citizens believe wild animals should not be kept as pets at all, and they are right. A positive list of permitted animals would create clarifications for citizens who might otherwise unknowingly acquire a protected animal from a dubious source and thus become part of an illegal trade chain without knowing it. We as Parliament have already demanded a positive list within the framework of the Welfare of Dogs and Cats regulation, for which I was the ENVI rapporteur. Here is a good opportunity to reaffirm that position. Thirdly, public authorities enforcing CITES need adequate financial resources. We also have to increase digitalization and promote and facilitate data sharing, for example, on the issuance and verifications of import applications. We must avoid duplication of efforts, and we need improved traceability of cited listed species and also of non-CITES listed species, as we learned on Tuesday, also through the expansion of tools such as traces. A detailed EU information system on wildlife trade would offer high effectiveness and lower administrative burden. And we also need stronger penalties and better enforcement. All this is very important, especially considering the rapidly growing online trade and the new risks it brings. But these are just a few things. I am sure that our experts will tell us much more. To conclude, the protecting animals and forests is a win-win situation for the whole world. We need rather to create a market around the ecosystem instead of stealing animals from nature. In short, we must value wild animals more, as they make an immense contribution to the biodiversity that is so vital for our survival. So many thanks for being here today. I will now hand over to Mr. Ilias Grampas, Deputy Director at the European Bureau for Conservation and Development, who will moderate today's discussion. And Ilias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Member of the European Parliament, Ms. Ripa. Thank you also to Mr. Luena and Mr. Vizik for kindly hosting the event today, but also to all the assistants and the teams that the event would have been nothing like that without their kind support. So thank you for everything. My name is Ilias Grampas. I'm managing the Secretariat of the MEP Group on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, and I'll be moderating the discussion to follow. So a warm welcome from my side as well. At this stage, we've heard all about the content from our excellent MEPs. Just with regards to the context, for us, it was extremely important to host this discussion before CITES CoP20, but also at this crucial period when the EU is finalizing its position when it comes to that critical international meeting. So what is essential from my point of view is 5 points. I can highlight them before we start, but some of them we've already touched upon. First, it's key going to CITES CoP20 to set our strategic objectives. That is also the purpose of this meeting. Second, we need EU leadership with credibility and clarity going to CITES. Third, it was stressed already by MEPs, science has to play a key role in this. Of course, collaboration with all stakeholders and parties involved. That's an extremely important point as well. And last but not least, reaffirming CITES as a convention centered on regulating legal, sustainable and traceable trade in wildlife, ensuring that such does not threaten their survival. So on this note, a warm welcome from my side as well. And I'll be passing the floor to EBCD Director, Ms. Despina Simons, for some introductory reflections too, from her point of view, but also from her experience in CITES all throughout the years.
Thank you, Elias, and thank you all. Good morning, welcome everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to say a few words about CITES, which I have been following for 36 years. EBCD is an international NGO focusing on the balance between conservation and sustainable use of living marine resources, established in 1989. I don't need to say some things about the importance of the CITES Convention. It is one of the most important environmental conventions that regulates illegal trade, the international trade of over 40,000 species of fauna and flora in order to ensure that the trade is sustainable and also the fighting the illegal trade, which is now becoming a big threat to international trade. EBCD has been actively involved in CITES ever since its establishment in 1989, and it was at the core of our activities. I personally have had the opportunity to participate over the years, both as a country, as a party representing my country, Greece, for many years, then participating as an NGO, as EBCD, and over the last 15 years as member of the IUCN delegation, which is one of the main advisory body to the convention. And furthermore, as secretariat to the Intergroup of Climate Change and Biodiversity, which was then the Intergroup in 1995, Intergroup of Sustainable Development, we facilitated over the years a lot of high-level reflections and meetings, including some fact-finding missions in South Africa, in other places. So it was at the core of the activities of the Intergroup, which is now the MEP for climate change and wildlife. So what we have been advocating, again, as we say, in support of sustainable use conservation, sustainable use as a conservation measure, and to find a balance between the three pillars of sustainable development. That is the survival of the species, but also the socioeconomic aspect, respecting local communities, economies, and livelihoods. We have been advocating decisions made on the best available science and active consultations of those that will have to implement the decisions. It has been demonstrated, and as we hear with some of the other speakers, that regulated legal trade can bring benefits to conservation and to people. So some of my reflections from my personal experience over the years, I would like to stress three important things. The need to have more dialogue amongst the parties to resolve divisive issues, because there are many in CITES, as we have had over the years, the elephant issue, now the sharks. So I think there is more dialogue amongst the parties themselves, and to try to find consensus and not polarization. Secondly, it's the need to increase coherence. It is very important to have coherence and coordination at national level. For example, the same countries are members of several conventions. However, their national, not well coordinated national authorities adopt decisions with different positions in one convention and the other. They go to the UN different bodies, CBD, they go different in FAO, different in CITES, different in regional bodies. So this has to be a coordination at national level is a key for me. And finally, the thing that is becoming now very important is the need to enhance cooperation and collaboration amongst the different UN agencies, interagency collaboration, both at global, regional, and national level. This has been highlighted now as a precondition for both the Global Biodiversity Framework of the CBD and the recently adopted treaty, Ocean Treaty, the BBNJ, which puts it as a precondition to have. This is becoming very important. We cannot have a proper implementation of the decisions if we don't have the necessary coordination and collaboration of the existing different bodies. To me, so this interagency collaboration is very important for effective management, effective implementation of the international decisions. A good example of this, for example, is the MOU that exists over the years, and which at the time I helped to negotiate, is the FAO CITES MOU on marine species. And I think we will hear more from this from the representative of FAO later on. So I think with these 2 points, I won't long. There are interesting presentations and speakers. So I look forward to the discussions and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Despina, for setting the scene, for your intro remarks, as well as for your reflections. If you can just turn off the mic. Thank you. Thank you for setting the scene, for your intro remarks, as well as for your reflections. When it comes to CITES, well, 36 years of experience is a few years more than the ones I've been on planet Earth. So I think that's quite some great experience there. But also the point on some fact-finding missions that the AP Intergroup was organizing before. I think that's a pretty much of an out-of-the-box idea. Maybe we can consider it with our hosting MEPs, something we can also do in the future.
Those years, 30 years ago, it was possible.
And of course, looking into the events agenda, we have an excellent set of speakers to come in. To begin with, we couldn't have a discussion about the priorities for CITES CoP20 without welcoming Ms. Karen Gaynor, Scientific Support Officer, working at the CITES Secretariat. And Karen, are you with us online?
I am here indeed, yeah.
Perfect. So we'd be very happy to, yes, very well. We'd be very happy to hear more on priorities going to COP, but also CITES mission and vision, and perhaps a teaser on what to expect in the months to follow.
So thank you very much. I do have a very short presentation. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen, and you let me know if you can see this. This is a slightly different system than I'm used to. So let me see if I have it here. Okay. Can you
Okay, that's perfect.
see my screen there? I just put it into, yeah. Can you see the projection mode now to full screen?
It's not full screen yet, but we can see it.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead in the interest of time, and hopefully you will be able to see this shortly. So let me start by, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, let me tell you that this is indeed a privilege to address you today on behalf of the CITES Secretariat as we look ahead to the 20th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, or as we all know it as CITES CoP20. I would like to thank the MEP Group on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainability and EBCD for inviting the Secretariat to share some information relating to the upcoming event with you and to reflect on the role of CITES in sustainable management of wildlife resources. So you should see the second screen about the COP, yes? Can someone confirm?
Unfortunately not.
Oh, okay. I do not know what is wrong here. And I guess I'll have to do it without the presentation, and then maybe I can send it to you and you can share it afterwards.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, okay. So as you all know, CITES COP will be held in Samarkand in Uzbekistan from the 24th of November to the 5th of December this year. And to give you an idea of the scale of the event, here are some statistics. So the participants expected are between 3,000 and 4,000. Agenda items to consider are in excess.
Karen, sorry to interrupt, but as there might be a bug perhaps with your share screen option, would you mind trying to restart it? Okay. Perhaps that can make it work.
Okay, let me just try. Stop sharing. And maybe if I do. Can you see it now? It's not showing up on mine that it is sharing.
We can, yes. If you can try the full screen, but we see it well now.
Oh, okay, perfect. So
okay.
you see the details for the top. Yeah, okay, great. That makes it a lot easier. Thank you. So yes, as I said, we have in excess of 120 agenda items. Many of these agenda items have sub-agenda items. So in reality, it is closer to 200 documents for the COP to consider. So the number of proposals that have been submitted for consideration to amend Appendices 1 and 2, we have 51 in total. 39 of these concern fauna, including 11 on aquatic species, and 12 concern flora. So new species that are proposed for inclusion in Appendices 1 and 2, we have 160. Many of the proposals are to move species from one appendix to the other, so they would not be counted as new species. Proposed new decisions, we have 344, and there are 5 new proposed resolutions. So as you can see, it is quite a huge agenda for the parties to get through. However, we are not simply preparing for a meeting. We are preparing for a moment of reflection. As Despina mentioned earlier, this is the 50th anniversary of CITES, so we will be reflecting on what has happened in the past, but also a moment for renewal and recommitment to the CITES Convention. It will be reflection on the journey behind us since CITES came into force, renewal of our shared vision, and recommitment to the objectives of CITES to ensure that international trade is legal, sustainable, and traceable. So just to frame CITES and have a quick overview of what CITES is, it is a trade convention, but it has conservation and science at its core. It's an international agreement between governments. We now have 185 parties, including the European Union. Established in 1973, CITES emerged from the realization that unregulated international trade in wildlife was driving some species towards extinction. It was also clear that no single country could manage this problem alone. And international wildlife trade, by its nature, crosses borders, and so the response needs to be international and multilateral in nature. So CITES was the first international agreement to recognize that trade itself is not inherently bad. On the contrary, trade in wildlife can be sustainable. It can support livelihoods, it can incentivize species protection, but only when governed by the principles of legality, sustainability, and traceability. So 50 years on, these founding principles remain more relevant than ever. Sorry, I should go back to that one. If we consider this, the global wildlife trade in wildlife, including plants, animals, and their derivatives, it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. It supports millions of people worldwide through employment, income generations, and poverty alleviation, thereby contributing to livelihoods and economic development. In addition, it is closely linked to the ever-growing value of wild fauna and flora from aesthetic, scientific, cultural, and recreational points of view. But when this trade is unsustainable, illegal, or poorly regulated, it can result in population declines, local extinctions, and increased extinction risk. It can disrupt ecosystems, undermine national and regional governance, and undermine sustainable livelihoods, and even fuel transnational crime. So CITES today regulates over 40,900 species, of which over 34,000 are plants. And the species are listed in one of the 3 appendices according to the degree of protection that they need. So this is the core tool of CITES, is the appendices. So for Appendix 1, these are species threatened with extinction and banned from international trade, commercial international trade, I should say. Of which there are approximately 1,100 species. Appendix 2 is species that are not yet threatened with extinction, but require controls to prevent unsustainable exploitation. And this is where most of the species are listed. It has over 39,250 species. And then lastly, we have Appendix 3, which is species included at the request of a country needing international cooperation to manage trade in a particular species. And there are around 500 species in this appendix. So just a reminder then that at the heart of this system of regulation is the non-detriment finding, or the NDF. And this is the scientific assessment to determine that trade will not harm wild populations. And it is the cornerstone of sustainable trade. Equally important is the legal acquisition finding, or LAF, which ensures that specimens in trade have been obtained in accordance with applicable legislation. And these complementary requirements are the fundamental pillars of sustainability and legality under CITES. So over the past 5 decades, just again, some reflections perhaps from the CITES point of view. So over the past 5 decades, CITES has continued to evolve, and it now addresses a range of issues, including traceability in timber and fisheries, captive breeding and ranching, artificial propagation and assisted reproduction, synthetic alternatives, and more recently, as we heard earlier, the complex nexus between trade and zoonotic disease risk. We've witnessed remarkable conservation turnarounds as a result of CITES. So some examples are the recovery of the vicuña through community-based trade in the fiber, the comeback of crocodile populations supported by regulated ranching, and the sustainable management of reptiles and African cherry, enabling rural incomes. So these examples are proof that regulated legal trade can be a force for conservation. But let us be honest, we are also continuing to face daunting challenges. The illegal trade continues to flourish, often outpacing the enforcement efforts. Many Appendix 2 species are traded at high volumes with weak or non-existent NDFs. Aquatic species, including sharks, seals, and corals, pose new regulatory challenges in terms of identification, traceability, and scale. And then capacity gaps among parties mean implementation is often uneven, especially for source countries in the global south. But these realities do not weaken the CITES mandate. They reinforce the urgency of our work. Well, we seem to have stopped moving. Here we go, sorry. So as we prepare for COP20, what must we acknowledge? Firstly, that CITES is only as strong as its implementation. The best listings and the best science are meaningless if they do not translate into action on the ground. And this means investing in and strengthening the capacity of scientific authorities, management authorities, and enforcement authorities such as customs, enforcement cooperation, digital tools for permitting and species identification, and of course, robust stakeholder engagement, including with Indigenous and local communities. Secondly, we must defend the role of CITES as a science-based trade instrument with listings based on biology and trade impacts. And third, we must recognize the increasing complexity of global trade, such as the rise of e-commerce, the explosion of synthetic substitutes, the use of laundering pathways, including through lookalike species, and the global appetite for exotic pets, traditional medicines, and luxury wildlife products. That these challenges require modern tools, including forensic genetics, traceability systems, and real-time customs data sharing. But CITES does not exist in isolation, and we've heard mention of a number of these earlier this morning. CITES intersects with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which seek to achieve sustainable development through balancing economic, social, and environmental dimensions, and with the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which aims to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. Cooperation and partnerships are central, with formal engagements established with various organizations, including other UN agencies such as FAO, and enforcement bodies such as the World Customs Organization, Interpol, and UNODC, along with the World Bank, through ICWIC, or the International Consortium for Combating Wildlife Crime. We must embrace this interconnectedness. Trade regulation must work hand in hand with species recovery plans, demand reduction campaigns, community livelihoods, and compliance monitoring and enforcement actions. And CITES has a unique place in this jigsaw puzzle as a global, enforceable, and legally binding instrument. It is one of the few tools that we have to help stop biodiversity loss at the border. So one final slide. So what are we hoping that COP20 will deliver? Firstly, a reaffirmation of the science-driven decision-making. As we say, the decisions should be based on the best available science. There should be a renewed focus on capacity building and implementation, and also bold commitments to adequately fund and resource CITES at the national and at the international level. And also a deeper dialogue on sustainable use and community benefits. But above all, it must remind the world that CITES is not just about restriction. It is predominantly about regulation. It's about creating pathways for trade that do not deplete, but sustain, trade that does not exploit, but enables recovery. So in closing, let us remember that every listing, every decision, every annotation that will be adopted at COP20 has real-world consequences for communities who depend on wildlife, for species that are teetering on the edge, for ecosystems that hold the line against collapse. So the hope is to go to COP20 not just with new proposals, but with renewed purpose. Let us strengthen CITES not only as a treaty, but as a tool to conserve and to foster cooperation and sustainable coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, for your presentation, as well as for letting us know what to expect in COP20. Thank you also for sharing with us more details about how CITES is evolving and adapting to new challenges, but also remaining committed to implementation, to its mission of ensuring that trade is sustainable, traceable, and legal. Karen referred to dialogue as key. This is at the core of everything we're trying to achieve through this event today. The importance for communities, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it from Dan as we progress. And last but not least, on collaboration with more UN agencies. And today we have United Nations Environment Programme and FAO with us. But before we reach to that point, I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. Nicola Oakes on behalf of Traffic, an organization very much centered around sustainability, environmental and socioeconomic. And perhaps we can hear more from Nicola about some priorities, some thoughts and reflections, but also recommendations for CITES CoP20.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. So my name is Nicola Oakes, and I'm representing the European Office of Traffic, the leading global organization working exclusively on trade in wild species. For over 40 years, Traffic has been working specifically on the trade in wild species, helping governments and communities make sure that this trade is legal, sustainable, and beneficial. As has been previously mentioned, when we talk about the trade in wild species, it's important not to focus only on the crime and trafficking. The truth is that most trade is legal and very valuable, currently estimated at 220 billion per year. This is seafood, furniture, fashion. These are some of the largest categories of traded commodities. Plants, timber, fish, and animals from the wild provide livelihoods for millions of rural households around the world. For example, medicinal plants are harvested and sold into industries worth billions of euros. Timber supplies construction and manufacturing. Even small-scale harvests and sales of wild fruits, honey, fish, or ornamental plants provide vital income for families with very few other options. Sustainable use of wild species is essential for the well-being of many indigenous people and local communities. And in turn, sustainable use also contributes to maintaining abundant, healthy populations of wild species. Illegal and unsustainable wildlife trade, however, undermines these benefits. It erodes communities' incomes, damages fair businesses, and drives species towards extinction. Unsustainable timber logging, poaching of valuable animals, or illegal harvest of high-value plants not only destroys nature, but removes income streams from people who are complying with the regulations. When illegal trade flourishes, sustainable trade and the livelihoods tied to it are put at risk. Supply chains are corrupted, trust in legal markets erodes, and in some regions, illegal wildlife trade links to organized crime, which destabilizes economies and governance. For the EU, this means that supporting sustainable trade abroad also means protecting fair markets and stability. The CITES Convention is a powerful regulation to assist in these goals. The upcoming CITES CoP20 aims to strengthen global cooperation to regulate legal and sustainable wildlife trade, combat illegal trafficking, and promote science-based decision-making. It focuses on improving regulatory frameworks, enhancing trade transparency and traceability, and supporting conservation and livelihoods through well-managed species trade. As wildlife trade specialists, Traffic supports governments in the implementation of the CITES appendices worldwide, and we build tools and systems that help both communities and governments manage trade properly. For example, in addition to monitoring illegal trade, we bring together data from across the world to give governments and decision makers a clear picture of where trade is happening and how to keep it sustainable. We use this data to provide objective evidence and guidance for governments. For example, ahead of every CITES COP, Traffic and IUCN jointly publish independent analyses of all proposals under discussion. These analyses are trusted by governments worldwide as an impartial technical resource, and the most recent set was released in advance of the upcoming COP last week. We also work with industries, government, and law enforcement agencies to understand the needs and develop tools to ensure sustainability of products. For example, working with local communities to build systems that help governments and community practitioners assess whether wild plant trade is sustainable and does not harm species or their ecosystems. We also work with governments to develop guidelines for verifying legality of timber. And to combat illegal trade, we have developed practical tools to help enforcement agencies detect illegal products. And sometimes these are very innovative solutions, looking, for example, at 3D shark fins to allow enforcement officials to actually identify shark fins within legal fisheries products. So within all of this, the European Union plays a critical role. The EU is a major market for wildlife products and a significant hub for global trade flows. It is one of the largest destinations for wildlife products in the world, from timber and tropical fish, leather goods, medicinal plants, and ornamental species. This makes EU markets influential and critical. It is also critical to remember that much of this trade passes through EU ports and airports. The strong checks and due diligence here can help stop illegal products before they reach consumers, while also setting a global benchmark for responsible markets. Conversely, weaknesses in regulations and enforcement can have knock-on effects abroad, allowing wrongdoing to persist. By acting as a driver of responsible trade, the EU can safeguard biodiversity globally, protect the livelihoods of harvesters and producers who depend on natural resources, and ensure that European consumers can trust the products they buy. So when managed legally and sustainably, wildlife trade can sustain rural communities, national economies, and biodiversity. But when illegal and unsustainable trade is allowed to persist, it damages all three. So strengthening sustainable trade must go hand in hand with tackling the crime and trafficking. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oakes, for your thoughts and recommendations, but also for sharing with us how traffic supports CITES vision and how to ensure sustainability. But of course, also for making the point with regards to why it's key to work together with governments, with all stakeholders involved, with local communities, and why collaboration is of so much importance. Our next speaker is Mr. Kim Friedman, Senior Fishery Resources Officer at FAO. Kim is connected online. Thank you very much, Kim, for being with us. Can you hear us? Could it be that you are muted? I hope we haven't lost you.
Sorry, I have to redo the start. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well.
Can
So
you
Kim,
see
the
the
floor
screen?
is yours. Thank you.
You can see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Just like to say hello to everyone in Brussels. From us in Rome, I'm Kim Friedman, the CITES focal point for FAO, Fisheries and Aquaculture Division. This talk will really be talking about the balance between biodiversity protection and conservation and fisheries management. And I just want to point out firstly that when we're looking at developing agreements around trade, international agreements of multilateral nature, fisheries and trade agreements sit side by side with binding multilateral agreements and non-binding multilateral agreements. We can see here we have UNCLOS, the Fish Stocks Agreement, the Port State Measures Agreement, WTO. Of course, in the binding realm for MEAs, Multilateral Environment Agreements, CITES plays a major role. And for non-binding, we've had mention already of some of the others. And I mentioned here at the bottom of this slide, if you get a chance to click the link, a history describing all the work that's been done through time in delivery of these functions by both fisheries and the conservation community, be they NGOs or multilateral environment agreements. We've heard from Karen the two parts of the appendices, one that stops trade in commercial species and one that tries to not stop but control trade in such a way as to avoid utilization incompatible with survival. And we also know that every 3 years, the CITES Conference of Parties sits together to consider the proposals, and I'm very much focused today in speaking on the commercially exploited aquatic species. I just want to give you a little bit of an insight of the delivery of this function. CITES parties, along with NGOs and others, have about 2.5 years to prepare proposals, which are then submitted to the CITES Secretariat, which are released to the general community 5 months before a COP. This is the first time we get as a community to see all the proposals that have been prepared. And FAO, as the UN body responsible for fisheries issues, convenes an expert panel where it invites experts on trade in fisheries, trade, and the species in question to come sit and deliberate over the CITES listing criteria and the evidence in proposals to give advice to CITES parties and FAO members on whether species meet or not the CITES criteria. And we've also heard from Nicola Oakes that IUCN Traffic do a similar function. The CITES Secretariat sit down, and within a month of the proposals reaching COP, they make a decision on whether species proposals meet or do not meet the criteria and whether they should be adopted or rejected, and give that advice to CITES parties, recognizing that CITES parties have sovereign decision on their final decision at COP. So you can see it's a very, very contested and very, very tight timeline to deal with the consultation around the proposals. I'm going to concentrate mostly on the aquatic species, and I'll just give you an inkling of what we're looking at for COP20. 48 species were proposed, but these also include another 52 as lookalike species. And when the CITES, when the FAO panel sat down, looked at the 11 proposals, these were sharks, rays, eels, sea cucumbers, and shellfish, we held 2 in-person meetings, one in Asia and one in Europe, to deal with the time zones, having in-person and virtual attendance of 39 global experts. The expert decisions on each of the proposals was thankfully unanimous. In other words, there's an opportunity for that decision of whether the proposal meets or not the CITES criteria for every expert to have a decision, and that's documented. But in this case, all decisions were unanimous across all the experts. If you have a look at the CITES panel report, the proposals for sharks, which were for 68 species, these did not meet the criteria. Rays, 9 species, eels, 17 species, sea cucumber 6, and shellfish 1. Probably the overarching message here is that 1% of the species were considered to have met the proposals. In the proposals were considered to have met the CITES criteria. So if we have a look across the species that were considered, these were the ones that were considered for AP1 style management. That means no more commercial trade. And these were the species for AP2. And overall, the decisions of the FAO expert panel is that 1 sea cucumber out of all of these species included in proposals met the CITES listing criteria. All of the evidence that was amassed and assessed is documented in the FAO expert panel report. This is the 8th report, and it also gives you some context around the discussion around some of the criteria which have ambiguous dealing by the different CITES parties, in that diminishing and declining is seen as different by some parties, which means that they look at the CITES criteria different to others. And I think this goes back to Despina talking about trying to build coherence and harmonization in thinking across national authorities, but also amongst parties. And it also gives general comments and observations beyond each species proposal assessment. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of how these assessments landed. If you look in the past for CITES COP 13 to 19, these are COPs that went ahead between 2004 and 2022. The FAO expert panel assessing proposals as meeting the criteria were positive on 51% of the time. So more than half of the time, FAO believes the CITES criteria were met by the proposals. The CITES Secretariat recommended adoption 78% of the time for these proposals, and the IUCN Traffic Panel inferred adoption 94% of the time. So you can see some of the coherence problems here. If we step now to the 11 CS proposals, the commercially exploited aquatic species proposal for COP20, and this is the table you're looking at now, this is a bit of a watershed in that FAO assessed one proposal met the listing criteria, which is 9% of the proposals. This is a very low meeting rate, unusually low. CITES Secretariat have only done a preliminary assessment. Their last assessment is still to come. In their preliminary assessment, it came in at around 27%, which is also lower than they've normally seen when they've considered proposals. IUCN Traffic maintained their high acceptance rate at 91%, which is pretty much standard for that panel. So just to give you another kind of overview of what we're looking at, lists proposals and assessments of commercially exploited species for COP20, we're looking at over 101 species. In the last COP, there were 119 species. Many of these were not proposed, but coming in under the lookalike function. And if we look further back from COP18, 17, 16, and before, we see a much lower rate of interest in aquatic species. This is showing an overall watershed shift in having a greater appetite amongst parties to use the CITES instrument for aquatic species. And I just want to summarize a little bit of the questions that we're dealing with when we're trying to assess which species to include in the CITES appendices. We're dealing at the moment in aquatic species with an increasing number of species, but also diversity of species which are being proposed for CITES listing. We have limited time for consultation, and this means limited time for FAO-led and fisheries sector-led inclusive consultation. We have challenges on the clarity of criteria because there are divergent interpretations of proposals and the listing criteria, which is leading to different decisions and difficulties in making science-based decisions for parties. We have implementation barriers. These are challenges in delivering CITES provisions for species that are already on CITES appendices. And we have trade barriers, barriers to people who are currently doing legal and sustainable trade in fisheries products due to the enormous amount of work that CITES authorities and fisheries authorities are dealing with the increasing number of species that aren't being matched with increasing funding and support for capacity building and implementation. So my suggestions for the EU consideration are to promote a more balanced representation. So enhance the integration of both sustainable use and biodiversity perspectives within CITES discussions so that we come out with better solutions. Encourage harmonized understanding of the CITES listing criteria. This is to promote a consistent interpretation of CITES listing, especially on 2AB of the appendix and the use of the fisheries footnote, which are part of a long negotiated text of CITES. And strengthen investment in effective implementation, because putting species on the CITES appendices is only the first step. And we really need to support the delivery, the implementation of the work, which again needs awareness raising, consultation. It also needs investment in all of the different process steps so that people can comply and we don't end up with more illegal trade due to the difficulties of implementing the convention's decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kim, for sharing with us all those insights with regards to the CITES listing process, but also on where and how FAO recommendations come into the picture with regards to aquatic species. Our next speaker is Dr. Svein Fossa, President of the European Pet Organization. And Svein would be very happy to hear from you on why CITES is essential for the pet sector, but also perhaps some concrete examples and maybe best practices also from your experience.
Thank you. As President of European Pet Organization, I speak on behalf of thousands of enterprises across Europe, most of them small and medium-sized businesses, united by a commitment to responsible and sustainable trade in animals. Our sector is often on the front line of CITES implementation, not because we deal extensively with rare or endangered wild harvested specimens, but because CITES also regulates all captive bred specimens of listed species, even strains domesticated and bred in captivity for hundreds of generations, to the point where they in no way can be mistaken for their wild ancestors. Still, we are fully committed to CITES and take our responsibility for nature and species conservation seriously. We want to see CITES succeed because effective conservation and sustainable trade are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. Science-based conservation and legal trade reinforce each other. It is when legal, transparent trade is made too complicated or even impossible that illegal trafficking flourishes. We strongly support CITES when its work is grounded in science and focused on results. We welcome efforts to strengthen the One Health agenda, and we are supporting ongoing research at Cardiff University on zoonotic disease risks and the role of illegal online trafficking. Such cross-sector cooperation linking public health, biodiversity and trade is exactly what CITES should encourage. But its role must remain supportive. We must avoid duplicating work already handled more effectively by other bodies. Above all, CITES must stay focused on its core mandate, regulating trade in endangered species. It cannot afford to be distracted by side agendas, whether zoonotic diseases, animal welfare, or other issues outside the Convention's text and purpose. We also welcome initiatives that broaden participation. The Global Youth Network can inspire the next generation, provided it gives a balanced picture that includes the benefits of responsible wildlife trade. The engagement of indigenous people and local communities must also go beyond consultation. These communities should be embedded in decision-making and must continue to receive tangible benefits from sustainable use. Trade must work for conservation, but it must also work for people. CITES has an important role in reducing illegal trafficking. We strongly support the EU Action Plan against wildlife trafficking and are actively involved in EU-funded projects linked to this. Yet, measures must be grounded in science and genuine behavioral insights, not in slogans or symbolic gestures. To be effective, they must address the real drivers of trafficking. Efforts will not succeed by making the legal, well-regulated trade more complex, more costly, or unviable. We must also be honest where the CITES system is failing. It is deeply concerning, as we heard from Kim Friedman, that 10 of the 11 aquatic listing proposals for CoP20 recently assessed by the FAO expert panel were found not to meet agreed criteria. If CITES is to retain credibility, it cannot allow politically driven or purely precautionary listings to replace science-based decisions. The case of seahorses is a clear example. Since the genus Hippocampus was listed, the small legal trade in ornamental specimens has collapsed, exactly as we warned in 2002. Yet the far larger trade in dried seahorses has continued almost untouched, and bycatch remains unresolved. The result was a measure that punished legal, transparent businesses while doing little for conservation. That is not what CITES should deliver. The same concern applies to marine ornamental fishes. Although the Animals Committee has now reached balanced conclusions, the debate revealed pressure from some parties to list species simply on the basis of politics or precaution, without as much as indications of threat from international trade. Such symbolic measures may create headlines, but they do nothing to save species, and they only undermine the credibility of the convention. We are equally concerned about the current proposal to list many tarantula species. The justification relies heavily on one single scientific paper with very limited data. Many of these species are abandoned in the wild or already bred successfully in captivity. Listing them without robust evidence would be disproportionate, and worse, it could create scarcity value that fuels illegal trafficking. That is exactly the opposite of CITES' intent. On corals, however, we see a genuine opportunity for valuable progress at this COP. Most corals in trade today are not taken from reefs, but propagated through fragmentation, much like plant cuttings. Yet, under current definitions, these are still often recorded as wild caught. This misrepresents reality, burdens compliant businesses, and makes enforcement more difficult. It also reduces incentives for further captive propagation. The Australian proposal under document 66.2 offers a constructive way forward by recognizing that asexually propagated corals can qualify as bred in captivity when produced under controlled conditions with traceability. CITES would align its rules with biological and commercial reality. We suggest that the wording be reviewed to account for corals produced asexually in situ, which make up a significant proportion of corals traded internationally. This would relieve pressure on wild reefs, support sustainable aquaculture, and make regulation more transparent. Together with partners such as the Ornamental Aquatic Trade Association and Ornamental Fish International, we have also put forward practical improvements, clearer terminology recognition of artificial substrates and live rock, and a scientific review of reporting units. We hope COP20 will establish a working group to refine these proposals as outlined in Doc 66.1, making the system easier to enforce, easier to comply with, and fully consistent with sustainability goals. Let me be clear. We are not opposed to regulation. On the contrary, we support strong, effective, enforceable rules. We reject illegal practices, the release of pet animals into the wild, and we promote best practice in animal welfare. But we oppose regulations that lack evidence, ignore socioeconomic realities, and ultimately fail to protect the species they claim to defend. Our request to policymakers is simple. Keep CITES focused on its core mission, regulating international trade in a way that is legal, sustainable, and traceable. Do not let it drift into symbolic measures that satisfy headlines but deliver nothing for biodiversity. Every listing decision must meet the test of science, of practicality, and of fairness. Only then can CITES retain the confidence of those who must implement its rules. And only then can it deliver real benefits for conservation, for communities, and for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svein, for highlighting the role of science, the One Health approach, the need for more cross-sector cooperation, avoiding to duplicate work, but also the role of indigenous people and local communities' involvement when it comes to supporting how trade can work for conservation and communities involved. Our next speaker is Mr. Nicolas Galoudec, Senior Policy Advisor at the United Nations Environment Programme Brussels office. So Nicolas, would be very happy to hear from you also UNEP's views on the subject.
Thanks so much. And if I may, I sort of might make more of a political reflection here than the technical. I think colleagues have been well served here with the challenges that are coming up with COP20. Just to make three, I think, short points. The first is that we are in sort of a point, I think, hasn't really escaped anybody what is going on in New York and the overall crisis of multilateralism. We're now all of us into, and in particular, environmental multilateralism. And this is actually something in which I would say the political oversight of such processes is of fundamental importance more and more. I mean, we know, of course, the global processes. We probably know from a public standpoint way less about those processes like CITES, and there are quite a few others. I think from a general standpoint, we are very much aware at some point, a bit of the climate convention, also aware of what is going on to a certain extent in biodiversity, convention on biodiversity protection, and even probably less so on this actually very, very important fundamental multilateral environment agreement. So indeed, the political oversight is fundamental, and I'm really grateful for this MEP group, also for the efforts of individual members and delegations that are going to be participating to such processes. And I think even more so now that we've seen that you've had reached a sort of an institutional agreement with the Commission on, say, non-binding and leading to the binding international agreements that the Parliament will have to be involved in. From an information perspective, also from an oversight perspective, I really want to make this point this morning that fundamentally we see that, at least from UNEP's standpoint, as the need that for these deliberations not to remain of technical nature. We need that to really reach the rest of the world, and for these people and for all of us to understand what is at stake. The second point is, of course, it hasn't also escaped to anybody that there's also within the EU a crisis of environment, and there as well we, at least from external observer, reaching difficult moments whereby there's possibly a risk of backtracking on some commitments. And so there's also a question mark here this morning that I want to make, is that from parliamentary work, what is the way forward, at least, or even from the Commission perspective? There's a clear risk, and I'm going to be very frank this morning, that we see an institutional deadlock in moving forward in ambition. So, and the way we see it, the way we see things, is that there could be actually opportunities to not, I wouldn't say circumvent, but really move past those obstacles that are actually very confrontational. These are actually, of essence, very difficult to move forward with, because we see on the one hand pro-environmental forces, on the other hand, people that probably are afraid of that. And one way I personally believe is to be put forward, and I think it's been hinted at by many of the speakers this morning, is really to put direct link between what those multilateral environmental agreements, including CITES, in particular CITES, are about, and their direct use by the private sector, by enterprises and companies. And I want to make this point very clear. We've had examples this morning of fisheries. We've had examples of the pet sector. I can add to this the timber and forestry sector. I can add to this the luxury goods sector and fashion, the pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, and to a certain extent as well, the e-commerce and trade. So these are a huge amount of sectors that are somehow, from a public standpoint, again, not connected to those discussions. We don't know what the reality is. How does it trickle down to simple operators? So in a way, in the public discourse, we have to make that point much more clear, I believe, because otherwise we risk that those stories are not being told, except within those circles of discussions. So really among this, make again this point clear as probably one way to overcome the difficulties we're facing currently within, or let's say, environmental discussions within the EU. So again, and as you do this morning, which I'm very grateful for it, again, the stories of sectors concerned by this, sectors that actually directly apply the provisions that are being negotiated by the EU as well, and of common consensus around the planet, around the globe, by 180 or more parties at this convention. This is really a fundamental importance. And I'm saying that as UNEP, we are a proud host organization of CITES, Secretariat, as well as many other, let's say, environmental related sectors. The same applies to those as well. And then leads me to the third point I want to make. Quite a few of you mentioned actually the need to enhance the interaction between UN agencies. But I would even say so that there's a need for CITES to be much more connected as well as there is today. But it's not from their, let's say, to the faults, but it's just a narrative that needs to be enhanced as well with the other processes that are taking place on the side. The Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on Ramsar, you mentioned the BBNJ treaty that's just been set. These connections as well with the other scientific body that been opposed as well, the IPBES. So the interaction are of fundamental importance because it really helps bringing together this puzzle again and speak about a story that makes sense. Otherwise, we see those those processes being siloed from each other, and it's not possible. So I'm saying things like this and knowing very much there are things ongoing in New York on sort of UN reform. And we believe, and there's been clear signs sent by the Secretary General of the UN that those processes should be really integrated together. And again, to make sure that there's broad understanding and delivery of the objectives that parties sign up to, including the EU in particular. So I'm going to leave it here, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for stressing the importance of, first of all, environmental multilateralism, EU's leadership and ambition, the need to focus on realities on the ground, but also for making the point with regards to breaking the silos, interagency collaboration with CITES, collaboration with more conventions, with scientific bodies, and all in all, why we all need to work together hand in hand when it comes to this subject today. Our next speaker is Dr. Dan Challender, connected with us online. Thank you for being with us and for representing IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, as we'll be very happy to hear from you more on the importance of involving local communities. Is something that we've touched upon briefly in the discussion already, but perhaps you can enlighten us a bit further on the importance of engaging with local communities when it comes to the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully you can see my slides. Can somebody give me a nod of the head to indicate we can? Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Hello from a sunny Oxford. I've got a few slides, and I am going to mention local communities and other resource users when it comes to wildlife. I'm going to talk about the CITES role in wildlife conservation and touch on the EU's objectives ahead of the forthcoming CITES CoP20 meeting as well. So my kickoff point is really, what does success look like under CITES? Now, this is a complex question, but it clearly involves international trade in CITES listed species being legal and sustainable and being conducted in full compliance with the convention. It also involves that being consistent with the long-term conservation of species and supporting sustainable development as well. And as other speakers have recognized, decisions taken at CITES COPs should be supported by the best available science and information. And parties can achieve legal, sustainable, and traceable international trade in CITES listed species by aligning formal and informal institutional arrangements. So that's considering factors like laws and property rights, as well as things like codes of conduct, sanctions, and social norms at each stage of and along supply chains for wildlife. And as Karen mentioned earlier, the vicuña is a great example of a CITES conservation success. The conservation model for vicuña includes considering the species' life history and ecology, but also other factors like social cultural factors, multi-level governance. How does governance work at an international level, a national and subnational and local level? And this includes considering things like land tenure, resource access, benefits that accrue to communities, economic factors, technology, and other things. So these are complex systems that we're dealing with, but success can be achieved under CITES if factors that I've mentioned here can be contended with by the parties. Why is CITES not working for some species? Well, based on a recent review of the convention, there are several factors that stand out. The first is weak legal frameworks. Some parties don't yet have laws to adequately enact CITES. There are also contradictions in legislation of parties too. The hunting of species might be prohibited or permitted, but the trade may not, for instance. There's also insufficient public awareness of which species and derivatives are included under CITES and what that means for people that want to use the resources. There's also a perceived illegitimacy of CITES implementing laws or parts of those laws by various actors in different systems in which CITES species occur. And there's also a lack of consultation with resource users and other key actors when it comes to formulating policy. And this links back to the point I made earlier about this lack of institutional alignment, both between formal and informal institutions at each stage of, but also along supply chains. And there are also resource deficiencies for law enforcement and management to implement CITES in most regions of the world. So as I start to move towards what I think some key objectives for the EU should be at the CITES CoP20 meeting, there are a few points here that I think are really worth recognizing as these important decisions to be taken at CITES CoP20. The first is recognizing that the funding landscape for wildlife conservation is not particularly great. Right now, lots of funding cuts from the UK and from the US. And I think it's also important to recognize that many CITES parties want trade, not aid, related to managing their wildlife populations. I think it's important also to recognize that CITES trade controls, especially bans, can be positive or negative for species and people. And this can and does change over time and space. And drawing on the IPBES assessment on the sustainable use of wild species, it's clear that the interventions that work best to ensure that species aren't overexploited where they are used are the interventions that are tailored to the social ecological context. And finally, I think it's important to recognize that criminalizing wildlife trade may produce suboptimal outcomes for both wildlife and people, much like we've seen with the war on drugs in recent decades. A few points here to consider when it comes to listing proposals within CITES. We've got some analysis which is being prepared for publication, which involves a content analysis of listing proposals within CITES over the last 20 years. And there are some key things that stand out. It's pretty clear that most proposals over the last 20 years don't really consider the impact of decisions on local people and indigenous communities well enough, if at all. Most proposals include very little information that indigenous peoples, local communities, and other resource users and stakeholders have actually been consulted on proposals before they've been submitted. And proposals also don't consider the market size for species and products in trade, the nature of consumer demand, or price trends well enough or adequately. And a nice example here is it a good idea to put a species into Appendix 1 if the markets for that species or product are actually growing, demand looks like it might be inelastic as well, and an Appendix 1 listing is proposed? Is that going to be a good idea? What are going to be the impacts of that in the real world? And then finally, feedback mechanisms have been considered in very few proposals only. So I would say that we're not thinking, the parties aren't thinking, and other stakeholders aren't thinking deeply enough about the actual impacts that these listing decisions will have in the real world. So with all of that in mind, two main objectives stand out for me for the EU ahead of the CITES CoP20 meeting. The first is to develop positions and take decisions based on the best available science and information. I would encourage the EU to support the adoption of guidance on consulting indigenous peoples and local communities on listing proposals. That's included in CITES CoP20 Doc 27. And then when it comes to amending the CITES appendices, I would encourage the EU, as well as all other parties, to think beyond the ecological and consider the broader system characteristics when it comes to wildlife trade. If we want success under CITES, we should really be thinking about things like property rights, multi-level governance arrangements, harvest incentives for local people, and benefits that accrue to local people. We should be considering whether resource users have been consulted on proposals or not, and the likely impact of this on outcomes if certain decisions are taken. We should be considering feedback effects too, especially for trade bans. Will bans realistically help, or will they hinder conservation, for example, by signaling scarcity to markets? And how can we mitigate any risks that are identified with these proposals? We should also consider dissenting views on the management of species as well, especially in range states, and try and seek out win-win compromises. And that might include things like the use of split listing of species between the appendices and/or revised proposals for COP21. So parties bringing back proposals to the next COP. And I think we should also be making decisions that allow for more progress at the national level, again, especially for range states with good conservation records. And that might include split listing, it might include the use of annotations. And all of these recommendations align with existing current CITES resolutions and the revised EU action plan against wildlife trafficking. So hopefully these comments are helpful. I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have, and I can share these publications with people too. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan, for your remarks, for highlighting what does success look like under CITES, but also for sharing your insights on which factors we need to consider, for sharing your points when it comes towards the EU objectives going to COP20, but also for when it comes to listing proposals and the role of indigenous people and local communities. I think this already comes as a key takeaway from the discussion today. I see it's 10:02 here, and if we look into the agenda, now is the time to take one or two burning questions. I don't know if MEPs in the room or other people want to raise a point, but we can take as much questions as those 3-4 minutes can allow us, so we can start.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm Ilaria Di Silvestre from IFO. Thank you for all the presentations. I have a question for Mrs. Gaynor for the CITES Secretariat. So in IFO, we carefully consider the assessment the Secretariat made of the proposal, and we really appreciate the effort for doing that. However, we have concern about the assessment on shark and rays proposals, because the CITES Secretariat proposed to oppose all of them except for the white tip shark. We're using argument, mainly the argument that have been submitted by FAO, but these arguments completely, or let's say disregard in large part new scientific papers, new research that have been made in the last 3 years, and that demonstrate that the trade in these species, in all the species that have been proposed for listing or uplisting, this trade is significant, is extensive, and largely exceed the data that have been reported to the CITES Secretariat. So today we have heard from all the speakers, I think this is a very welcome call to use a science-based decision-making process. So the question for you, for the Secretariat, which is I hope, as well, is if the Secretariat is going to consider this paper that my understanding is that they have been submitted to the Secretariat to finalize the assessment of the shark and rays proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. And I don't know, Karen, if you would like to come in on this point, or Kim from FAO.
Yes, thank you very much, Ilias, and thank you for the question. I think this is a useful opportunity for me to explain the process from the Secretariat's point of view for finalizing our assessments. As you will know, we published our provisional assessments last month. Those provisional assessments were based entirely on the content of the actual proposal as submitted and any readily available information. So the information from the FAO expert panel has not yet been incorporated into our assessments. Today is actually the deadline for the submission of additional information from statutory consultees like FAO, so the expert panel report will be taken into account from this point on, but also all other RFMOs, ITTO when it comes to timber. And in the provisional assessments, and in particular, I think in a lot of the marine species proposals, the Secretariat indicated that at this stage there was insufficient information, and we sought additional information from the proponents and anyone else for those proposals. So today is the deadline for all the submission from statutory consultees, from parties, and from the proponents to clarify. We will then take all of that information, and if we do have this research paper that you are referring to, that will be taken into consideration, And our final assessment then will be published sometime between the 16th and the 21st of October, but at least a month before the meeting. And that will take into consideration all of the new information that we have to hand. So I hope that clarifies the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Is there perhaps any other question from the room? Yes, we can take that one, but let's just please keep in mind we have 1 minute for the question and the answer if possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Martin Singheiser, representing private sector of animal keepers in Germany. And I do not have a question. I have rather a comment on what Manuela Ripa said in the beginning, that we need data, and we need data, for example, in Eurostat for analyzing the trade. What we also have as a databasis is all the data by the private sector, private keepers and breeders of endangered species that submit their numbers of captive bred specimens to the competent authorities. And we are not able within Germany or within the European Union to evaluate these data and to show the contribution of the private sector to ex situ species conservation. And we really urge the Commission and the Parliament and the Member States to work on the digitalization of these data so we have a more compiled picture than only extracting information from online advertisements on fairs and shows. So we have a real good databases, but it cannot be evaluated. And this is a lack of data we are currently facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. And I think the importance of data is a key point, and we can continue the discussion also after the event. On this note, I see we're running out of time, so I'd like to seamlessly provide the floor to Ms. Cristina de Avila, Head of Unit on Global Environmental Cooperation and Multilateralism on behalf of DG Environment for your reflections as well, perhaps on the EU position for CITES COP, but also I think it would be worth to hear from you how does the revised EU action plan against wildlife trafficking come into the picture. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. And before also thanking you for having me here today and inviting us to speak today on our priorities for the EU and for the Commission on COP20, on the CITES COP20. I want to apologize for my appearance and not having me here before. I'm really sorry, I had a medical appointment, but I'm still glad, and I think it's a good opportunity to come and talk to you about, as I said, our priorities. So you know that the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, or wild fauna and flora, is pivotal in the EU's effort to conserve biodiversity and to combat wildlife trafficking. Our stance for COP20, we want it to be ambitious, strong, targeting sustainable development and conservation in line with the EU larger policy objectives, in particular the biodiversity strategy, but also the EU action plan against wildlife trafficking, which you just mentioned. Together with the experts from the member states, we have been working towards this COP20 and the EU position towards this COP20 since 2024. So first, we worked on our proposals for listing, the European Union proposals for listing, and we submitted them at the end of, before the summer, so in June. At the end of June, we submitted the EU proposals for listing. There are six listing proposals for consideration by the COP. There are selected species of water frogs, sea cucumbers, golden sandfish, freshwater eels, gulper sharks, and Indian bdellium tree. We will also co-sponsor two other listing proposals by other parties to CITES. And this is the uplisting of the oceanic white tip shark to Appendix 1, from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, and the listing of the tope shark and the smooth hounds. So what we've been doing since this decision was, our proposals for listing were submitted to the Secretariat, is to work on the other parties' proposals for listing. These became available sorry, in July, as well as also the other working documents, because there are other documents, not just the listing proposals. So we've been working, sorry, with the member states on analyzing these proposals from other parties and also the other working documents. We have prepared the position for the European Union on these other listing proposals and documents, And we just adopted yesterday the Commission proposal for this position that would again take form of a Council decision. And this is available now. We will now discuss it with Council. We already had a preliminary discussion, although we didn't have the proposal adopted, but on some of the ideas already captured in this proposal last week. And we will continue discussing with the Member States in the Council Working Party next week. And also, I think there's two meetings now in October and one in November. So what are our priorities? Apart from, of course, some that manifest in our listing proposals, I can talk about that later. I think for the European Union, the most important thing is to maintain the core focus of the Convention, protect endangered species by regulating the international trade, using, of course, the science-based approach, and fortify the international community's response to wildlife trafficking. While doing so, we recognize the role of the range states, and that's very important for us to also always take into consideration both the opinions of the range states, and that's also part of the tremendous amount of consultations that we have to do for our positions, in particular for the listings, but also of the local communities whose livelihoods are very much, and cultural practices are very much connected to biodiversity conservation and to the wildlife that they live next to. The European Union should follow a comprehensive approach, addressing both the root causes, but also strengthening the legal and the policy frameworks, improving enforcement, enhancing global cooperation. And in this context, we will support all the COP decisions that aim at building capacity, facilitating sharing best practices amongst countries for more effective implementation of CITES. As I said before, some of our priorities are very much lying in some of our submissions, and in particular the European eel, which we know is the most trafficked species in Europe. This remains, as I said, a priority. We are exploring various ways of ensuring an effective implementation of the existing listing since 2009 of the European eel in Appendix 2. At the same time, we're also seeing a decline in the conservation status of the other eel species that whose trade has come to replace the part of the trade of the European eel, and we also are willing to protect them. So our proposal is to list the entire Anguilla genus, and is part of this response that we are exploring on how to effectively implement the listing of the European eel. The other response is a resolution on eels, which we will support in an improved and strengthened form. One of the issues, and when I was saying that one of our priorities is to ensure that to maintain the focus on the core aspects of the convention, is because we are seeing that the work of CITES, in particular CITES Secretariat, is expanding enormously. So with the growing number of listing has increased the complexity of the enforcement, and has exacerbated the work of the Secretariat, the committees, and also the parties. And we need to acknowledge these challenges and at COP20, and we have to identify practical ways forward to address it. And there are, I think, a number of proposals that have been made, and we will support. I think that's all from my side. I think there would have been some questions and some discussions that unfortunately I haven't been able to participate to, but I will be happy if you allow me to respond to some direct questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Avila, for sharing your remarks, for your work, and for presenting to us the priorities going to COP20, for your leadership, for stressing the importance of science, but also implementation when it comes to this topic, but also on a personal note for your flexibility and being with us at the event this morning. I would like now to pass the floor to MEP Mr. Vizek for his closing reflections as well. Mr. Vizek is an MEP very much involved in this subject in the European Parliament. I know that the topic is among your key policy priorities. I know that you've been following the event with great interest. And honestly, from our side, it's a great privilege to be able to work with such committed MEPs. On this note, I'd like to thank all three co-hosting MEPs for being with us today, for making this discussion a reality. A warm thanks to all speakers. And turning to Mr. Vizek, I'd like to also ask you, what are you taking away from this discussion today?
Yes, thank you very much for the floor and for this beautiful meeting today. It was very useful and very, very informative for me as well. And it very well depicts how complex the issue of international trade and regulation actually is. We are going to attend the CoP20 in Uzbekistan pretty soon. And I really need to stress what has been stressed already, that EU has a role to play on this meeting, and we definitely should be the bearers of very sound and present leadership in this meeting, because this is actually the role that EU needs to play on a global scale, and I'm very much committed to deliver that. Saying that, I think it really is a pivotal role for us to come with very sound strategic objectives for this meeting, really to implement all, or to ask and demand and try to pursue all those priorities that you colleagues have stressed during this meeting, pointing towards the process of assessment and regulating of the international trade with endangered species should definitely be very much related or confined or based on a scientific fundament. That is really very much the essence of what we should achieve. The data must be there. They might be robust, they might be solid, and we should definitely be able to assess the data properly and implement them into the reality. The implementation might be really the key word in this regard, and I would definitely only mention what is needed to be really established. The digitalization process regarding the data is very much needed in all the aspects of our society, but also in this topic. We definitely must improve the capacity, the resources needed for proper implementation of this beautiful framework. And I also would definitely emphasize the role of more thorough and more intense stakeholder engagement. We definitely should go beyond the ecological framework that was very well stressed by Dr. Challenger, but that doesn't mean that we should somehow neglect the ecological fundament that is really at the beginning of the process, where there are signs that there is something wrong with the ecology of the species, with the population, with the survival. There we really need to be very sound. And in that regard, it was really striking for me to see how this assessment process actually is very variable in its essence. You know, when we have been presented the outcome of the assessments of different stakeholders within the assessment process, to me it is really beyond comprehension how, if we state that we are actually working with scientific data and using scientific methods, that the variance in outcome can be that big. To me, this is really beyond comprehension, because if this is the reality of the assessment process, I wonder whether this is a useful assessment process. You know, if one institution has only 1% admittance and the other has 91% admittance, I mean, where is the truth? You know, if all of these organizations really work with scientific data, the outcome should not be that variable. That is something that I think we need to tackle. We need to find the alignment of the players, really to be able to work with the solid data, because this is not the situation that is currently in the field. So I would definitely go also for that. Maybe there's some explanation beyond it, but I feel that there is a lot of interest involved, which might bias the outcome one or the other way. And we really need to know for sure what's happening in the field in order to tackle the problem. You know, we need to understand the problem in order to tackle the problem. So this would be my taking from this committee or from this meeting. It's really a complex issue. And we definitely need to improve the situation, because we are actually facing the 6th mass extinction. It's in the data already, you know, and we need to find a way how to tackle this problem. And the trade might be well, the culprit, but definitely might be also the solution of this problem. So let's exploit that potential and really find the best way how to tackle this issue and how to preserve a beautiful biodiversity of this beautiful living planet. That should be our goal. Thank you very much. So thank you once again for attending, and looking forward to meeting you again.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you, Kim. See you
Dan,
soon.
I'll be emailing you in the like today or tomorrow, just to try and wrap up this last bit of paperwork. And I'm sorry that they've expanded the paper.